It's Tuesday afternoon in medieval London, and you're hiding in a grain barrel while three of your regular customers, a priest, a merchant, and a city guard, have a heated argument about moral standards in the marketplace directly above your head. The priest is condemning the very sins he paid you to facilitate yesterday. The merchant is complaining about the decline of public virtue while still owing you money from last week, and the guard is nodding along sanctimoniously, apparently having forgotten that he just spent his lunch break negotiating your rates for tonight. Meanwhile, you're crouched in yesterday's wheat chaff, trying not to sneeze because if they discover you here, all three of them will suddenly develop convenient amnesia about ever having met you, and you'll be the one dragged off to face whatever punishment they decide demonstrates their commitment to public morality. Welcome to the glamorous world of medieval sex work, where the biggest decision of your day isn't which expensive wine to pair with dinner, but whether that suspicious-looking sore on your latest customer means you should charge extra for hazard pay. Hey there, fellow insomniacs and history enthusiasts. Tonight we're diving deep into what might be history's least understood profession, and by the end of this journey you'll understand why Hollywood tends to skip over the grittier details of medieval brothel life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now grab your most comfortable pillow, maybe light a candle for ambiance, and let's ease into tonight's tale of survival, desperation, and the daily grind of women who had very few other options in a world that offered them almost none. Your story begins in the year 1347. During what historians politely call a challenging time for European society, and what you, if you could speak from your grave, would probably call a complete and utter nightmare. The Black Death is sweeping across Europe like a particularly vindictive houseguest, killing roughly 1/3 of the population, and leaving the survivors to pick up the pieces of a shattered world. You're born in a small village outside of London to parents whose names you'll never really know, because record-keeping for peasant families wasn't exactly a priority for medieval bureaucrats. Your father might have been a farmer, a blacksmith, or possibly just some guy who happened to be in the area when your mother needed someone to blame. Your mother, if she survived your birth, which was roughly a 50-50 proposition in those days, probably died within the next few years from disease, childbirth complications, or simple exhaustion from trying to keep her family alive in a world that seemed actively hostile to human survival. By the time you're 7 years old, you're essentially an orphan in a world where orphans had the life expectancy of mayflies and about as much social protection. The village priest might take pity on you and let you sleep in the church during winter, but his idea of charity mostly involves lectures about sin and the occasional bowl of thin gruel that tastes like liquid disappointment. This is when you learn your first valuable lesson about medieval economics. Everything has a price, and that price is usually higher than you can afford. Food costs money you don't have. Shelter costs money you don't have. Protection from the various men who view unaccompanied young women as recreational opportunities also costs money you don't have. But there is one thing you do have. One asset that medieval society grudgingly acknowledges has value, even if that same society will spend considerable energy condemning you for possessing it: your body. And in a world where options for women are limited to marry someone who won't beat you to death, join a convent if they'll have you, or figure something else out, the something else often involves renting that asset to whoever has the coins to pay for it. The transition into sex work isn't some dramatic moment of decision. There's no tearful scene where you dramatically declare your intentions to a concerned friend. It's more like gradually sliding down a muddy hill. Each step seems reasonable at the time, but before you know it, you're at the bottom wondering how you got there. Maybe it starts when you're 12, and the baker offers you a loaf of bread in exchange for letting him touch you in ways that feel wrong, but aren't technically illegal. Maybe it's when you're 14, and a traveling merchant offers you a warm place to sleep for the night, with the understanding that warmth comes with certain expectations. Or maybe you're 15 and simply realize that the alternative to accepting these arrangements is starving to death in a ditch somewhere, and survival trumps dignity every single time. By the time you're 16, You've established a routine that would horrify modern sensibilities but represents a reasonable survival strategy for medieval times. You've found a spot near the market square where merchants and travelers gather, close enough to potential customers but not so close that the town watch bothers you too often. You've learned to read the signs that distinguish between a customer who will pay what he owes and one who thinks violence is an acceptable substitute for currency. And you've developed the 1,000-yard stare that comes from accepting that your life has taken a turn that can't be undone. In a world that offers no second chances and precious few first ones, your daily routine starts before dawn, not because you're particularly industrious, but because dawn is when the competition for customers is lightest and when you're least likely to attract unwanted attention from authorities. Medieval law enforcement has a complicated relationship with prostitution. Officially, it's sinful and illegal. Practically, it's a necessary evil that keeps soldiers, merchants, and other potentially troublesome men from causing bigger problems. The first task of every day is inventory management, which sounds more sophisticated than it actually is. You own exactly 3 items of clothing: the dress you're wearing, a spare dress that's either being washed or mended, and a cloak that serves triple duty as overcoat, blanket, and sometimes tent. Your entire worldly possessions fit into a small sack that you can carry easily, because permanent residences are for people with reliable incomes, and reliable income is a luxury you can't afford. Personal hygiene in medieval times is a challenge for everyone, but it's a particular problem when your profession requires intimate physical contact with strangers. Water costs money, soap costs more money, and privacy for bathing costs money you definitely don't have. Most days, getting clean means wiping yourself down with a wet rag when no one's looking, and hoping that whatever diseases you might be carrying aren't immediately obvious to potential customers. The economics of medieval prostitution are brutally simple. You charge whatever the market will bear, which is usually less than you need and more than your customers think you deserve. A typical transaction might earn you enough to buy a meal, assuming the customer actually pays and doesn't decide that your services weren't worth the agreed upon price. Repeat customers are gold, not because they're pleasant to deal with, but because they represent predictable income in an unpredictable world. The business side of sex work in medieval times makes modern entrepreneurship look simple by comparison. You have no legal protections, no recourse against customers who refuse to pay, and no guarantee that the authorities won't decide to make an example of you if they need to demonstrate their commitment to public morality. You're essentially running a small business in a market where the customers can legally assault you, the competition might literally kill you, and the government's policy toward your industry changes based on which way the political winds are blowing. Customer relations require skills that weren't taught in any medieval finishing school. You need to be able to assess a potential client's ability to pay, likelihood of violence, and general level of hygiene, all within the first few seconds of conversation. You develop an eye for spotting soldiers who haven't been paid in months, merchants who think haggling applies to all transactions, and locals who view you as a convenient target for whatever frustrations they're carrying. The actual work involves considerably more acting than people realize. Medieval men, like men in all eras, have fragile egos that require careful handling. Part of your job is convincing each customer that he's attractive, skilled, and worthy of desire, regardless of the reality that he's probably unwashed, rough, and utterly indifferent to your comfort or pleasure. You become an expert at making appropriate noises at appropriate times, expressing fake enthusiasm convincingly, and ending encounters quickly enough to maximize your earning potential without being so obviously rushed that customers feel cheated. Location management is another constant challenge. You can't operate out of a fixed location because that would make it too easy for authorities to find you when they need to crack down on vice for political reasons. But you also can't be too nomadic because regular customers need to know where to find you. The solution is usually a rotation of semi-public spaces, alleyways, abandoned buildings, rented rooms when you can afford them, that offer enough privacy for business transactions while remaining accessible to your customer base. The economics of your profession are complicated by the fact that payment often comes in forms other than currency. Medieval economies run on barter as much as money, so you might be paid in food, clothing, tools, or other goods that you then need to convert into the things you actually need. A loaf of bread is great if you're hungry, but it doesn't help with rent if you're lucky enough to have found a landlord willing to house someone of your social standing. Seasonal variations affect your business in ways that would challenge any modern entrepreneur. Winter brings fewer travelers and less disposable income, but also more people looking for ways to keep warm. Spring means agricultural work that takes potential customers away from town, but also seasonal workers with money to spend. Summer brings the highest volume of travelers and merchants, but also increased competition from other women who've decided that sex work beats starving. Autumn means harvest season and better economic conditions generally, but also the return of moral crusades as communities prepare for the religious intensity of winter. Professional relationships in your line of work are complicated by the fact that other women in similar situations are simultaneously colleagues, competitors, and potential allies. You might share information about dangerous customers, pool resources for renting rooms, or watch each other's backs during risky encounters. But you're also competing for the same customer base, which means that friendship can quickly turn into rivalry when business is slow. The relationship with local authorities follows patterns that would be familiar to anyone who's dealt with corrupt bureaucracies. Official policy condemns your profession, but individual officials are often willing to look the other way in exchange for services or information. You learn which guards can be bribed, which officials have personal interests in maintaining a blind eye, and which representatives of law and order are actually more dangerous than the criminals they're supposed to be stopping. Medical care for someone in your profession is essentially non-existent. Medieval medicine has only the vaguest understanding of sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy prevention, or gynecological health. When problems arise, and they arise frequently, your options are limited to folk remedies of questionable effectiveness, prayers to saints who probably aren't listening, and hoping that whatever's wrong with you either heals itself or kills you quickly enough that you don't suffer too long. Pregnancy is a professional hazard that can end your career and possibly your life. Medieval contraception consists mainly of wishful thinking and herbal remedies that may or may not work. When prevention fails, your options are limited to dangerous procedures performed by people with no medical training or carrying the pregnancy to term in a world where childbirth kills roughly 1 woman in 10, and single motherhood is both economically impossible and socially unacceptable. The social stigma attached to your profession creates a peculiar form of psychological isolation. You're simultaneously visible and invisible. Visible enough that everyone knows what you do. Invisible enough that no one acknowledges your humanity. Respectable society treats you as a necessary evil at best, a moral cancer at worst. Religious authorities condemn you as a sinner, while tacitly acknowledging that your services prevent worse social problems. Even other marginalized groups look down on you, because there's always someone lower on the social ladder to despise. Personal relationships outside of work become nearly impossible to maintain. Men who might be interested in you romantically are deterred by your profession, while men who are interested in your profession aren't looking for romance. Friendships with respectable women are out of the question, because associating with you would damage their reputations. Family relationships, if any survive from your previous life, are typically severed either by your choice or theirs, because maintaining connections across the social divide that separates the respectable from the fallen is too complicated for most people to navigate. The daily emotional toll of your work is something that medieval society doesn't acknowledge, and modern historians often gloss over. Each transaction requires you to dissociate from your own physical experience, to treat your body as a commodity separate from yourself. The psychological skills required to survive in this profession, emotional numbing, strategic dissociation, compartmentalization of identity, are the same skills that modern psychology recognizes as trauma responses. Violence is a constant threat that shapes every aspect of your daily routine. Customers who refuse to pay often express their refusal through physical assault. Competitors might use violence to eliminate competition for prime locations or desirable customers. Local authorities might use violence as a form of moral enforcement or simple entertainment. Even potential allies in similar situations might turn violent if they perceive you as a threat to their own survival. The legal system offers you no meaningful protection and considerable potential harm. Officially, your profession is illegal, which means that any interaction with law enforcement carries the risk of punishment ranging from fines you can't afford to public shaming that could end your ability to earn money. Practically, your illegal status means that crimes committed against you are rarely investigated and never prosecuted. because society views violence against prostitutes as either deserved punishment or inevitable occupational hazard. Economic mobility is essentially impossible. The money you earn goes immediately toward basic survival: food, shelter, clothing, and the various bribes and fees required to avoid legal troubles. Saving money is impossible when you never have enough for current needs, and investment in future opportunities is a luxury reserved for people with secure present circumstances. The profession that keeps you alive also traps you in a cycle of day-to-day survival that offers no path toward anything better. Geographic mobility is limited by the same economic constraints that prevent other forms of advancement. Moving to a new location requires money for travel, time to establish new customer relationships, and knowledge of local conditions that determine everything from pricing to safety. The skills that make you successful in one location may not transfer to another, and the risks of starting over in an unfamiliar place often outweigh the potential benefits of change. Professional development, such as it is, consists mainly of learning to survive longer and earn more efficiently. You develop expertise in reading people quickly, managing dangerous situations, and maximizing income from limited opportunities. These are valuable skills, but they're not the kind of expertise that translates into other forms of employment, assuming other forms of employment were available to someone with your social status. The relationship with religious institutions is particularly complex. Official church doctrine condemns your profession as sinful, but practical church policy often acknowledges the social utility of your services. Some religious authorities argue that prostitution prevents more serious sins like adultery or rape. Others maintain that your existence serves as a moral lesson about the consequences of sin. A few even suggest that your suffering in this life might earn you consideration in the next, though they're notably vague about the details of how that spiritual accounting system works. Personal faith becomes complicated when your daily survival depends on activities that your religion explicitly condemns. Some women in your profession maintain strong religious beliefs, viewing their circumstances as temporary trials or divine punishment that can be endured and eventually overcome. Others abandon faith entirely, reasoning that a God who allows such suffering either doesn't exist or doesn't care about human welfare. Most develop a pragmatic approach to spirituality that focuses on immediate concerns, prayers for safety, health, and enough money to eat, rather than abstract theological questions. The aging process in your profession is accelerated by the physical demands of the work, the health hazards of medieval life, and the cumulative effects of violence and stress. Women who live to see 30 are considered veterans, and those who reach 40 are rare enough to be remarkable. Planning for old age is pointless when old age is unlikely, and retirement planning is impossible when current income barely covers current expenses. Seasonal religious observances create periodic disruptions to your business that require careful navigation. During Lent, local authorities might crack down on vice to demonstrate their piety, forcing you to be more discreet or temporarily relocate. During major religious festivals, moral fervor might lead to public campaigns against sin that target your profession specifically. During harvest celebrations and other community events, increased business opportunities might be offset by increased scrutiny from religious and civil authorities. The relationship with other marginalized groups creates both opportunities for mutual support and sources of additional conflict. Criminals, vagrants, and other social outcasts might view you as a potential ally against common oppressors, or as competition for limited resources and safe spaces. Merchants and traders might see you as a useful service provider, or as a potential source of moral contamination that could damage their business relationships with respectable customers. Professional specialization within your field develops based on customer preferences, personal abilities, and local market conditions. Some women cater to wealthy merchants who can afford higher prices and expect more sophisticated services. Others focus on soldiers and working men who want quick, inexpensive encounters. A few develop reputations for particular services or abilities that allow them to charge premium prices, though specialization also creates vulnerability if market demand shifts. The information economy surrounding your profession is surprisingly complex. Knowledge about which customers pay reliably, which areas are safe to work, which authorities can be bribed, and which competitors are dangerous becomes a valuable commodity that can be traded, sold, or used as leverage in negotiations. Maintaining good relationships with other women in similar situations is partly about mutual protection. but also about access to information that can mean the difference between success and failure, safety and danger. Personal grooming and presentation require constant attention despite limited resources. Customers expect a certain level of attractiveness and cleanliness, but achieving these standards with medieval hygiene options and minimal income is a daily challenge. You learn to make repairs to clothing that extend its usable life, to use cosmetics made from materials you can scavenge or afford, and to maintain an appearance that suggests health and desirability, even when you're sick, injured or exhausted. The development of professional personas allows you to separate your working identity from whatever sense of self you maintain privately. You might adopt different names, personalities or backgrounds when dealing with customers, both to protect your privacy and to provide the fantasy experiences that clients expect. Managing these multiple identities requires considerable psychological skill and emotional energy. Territorial disputes with competitors can escalate into serious conflicts that affect your safety and earning potential. Prime locations for conducting business are limited, and competition for access to the best spots can involve everything from verbal agreements and informal negotiations to threats, sabotage, and outright violence. Learning to navigate these conflicts while maintaining necessary professional relationships requires diplomatic skills that few medieval women had opportunities to develop in other contexts. The seasonal migration patterns of your customer base create predictable fluctuations in demand that require careful planning and resource management. Traveling merchants, seasonal workers, soldiers on campaign, and pilgrims following religious routes all represent temporary markets that can provide significant income if you're positioned to take advantage of them. But these opportunities also attract competition and create boom and bust cycles that make financial planning nearly impossible. Dealing with customers who want services beyond your physical or emotional limits requires negotiation skills and personal boundaries that must be maintained despite economic pressure to accept any paying work. Some requests might be dangerous, others degrading, and still others simply impossible to fulfill safely. Learning to refuse certain customers or certain services while maintaining your income and personal safety is a complex skill that balances economic necessity against physical and psychological well-being. The development of regular customers who provide relatively predictable income becomes crucial for long-term survival. These relationships require ongoing management that goes beyond simple business transactions. Regular customers might expect conversation, emotional intimacy, or personal attention that extends your working hours but doesn't necessarily increase your compensation. Balancing the benefits of steady income against the additional demands of maintaining personal relationships with clients creates ongoing tension between professional and personal boundaries. Housing arrangements for someone in your profession present unique challenges that reflect your social status and economic limitations. Respectable landlords won't rent to you, which limits your options to other marginalized property owners who might be sympathetic to your situation or desperate enough for rental income to overlook your profession. Shared housing with other women in similar circumstances offers cost savings and mutual protection, but also creates potential conflicts over customers, income, and house rules. The relationship with local merchants who provide goods and services you need is complicated by your social status and irregular income. Some merchants might refuse to serve you entirely, others might charge higher prices because they know you have limited alternatives, and a few might be willing to trade goods for services. Establishing reliable relationships with merchants who will treat you fairly becomes crucial for accessing basic necessities at affordable prices. Personal safety strategies evolve based on experience and shared knowledge from other women in similar situations. You learn to recognize signs of potential violence before situations escalate, to position yourself in locations that offer escape routes if needed, and to maintain relationships with people who might provide assistance in emergencies. These safety measures require constant vigilance and significantly affect how you conduct business. The impact of major historical events, wars, plagues, famines, political upheavals on your profession creates unpredictable disruptions that can dramatically affect your circumstances. Wars might bring armies that provide increased business opportunities, but also increased risks of violence and disease. Plagues create public health concerns that might lead to crackdowns on activities perceived as morally or physically dangerous. Famines affect everyone's economic circumstances, reducing disposable income and increasing competition for survival resources. Managing the psychological effects of social isolation requires coping strategies that help maintain mental health in circumstances that would challenge anyone's psychological resilience. The stigma attached to your profession creates isolation from mainstream society, while the competitive nature of your work limits opportunities for genuine friendship with peers. Developing internal resources for emotional support and maintaining some sense of personal worth despite social condemnation becomes crucial for long-term psychological survival. The seasonal cycles of religious and secular authority create predictable patterns of tolerance and persecution that require careful attention and strategic planning. Understanding when local authorities are likely to crack down on vice, when religious fervor might lead to moral campaigns, and when economic or political pressures might make you a convenient scapegoat, helps you adjust your activities to minimize risks. Professional networking within the broader community of marginalized people creates opportunities for mutual support and shared resources. Relationships with tavern keepers, minor criminals, traveling merchants, and others who operate on the edges of respectable society can provide access to information, protection, and economic opportunities that wouldn't be available through conventional channels. The physical demands of your work extend beyond the obvious aspects to include the stamina required for long working hours, the physical resilience needed to recover from injuries and illness without medical care, and the strength required to defend yourself when necessary. Maintaining physical health becomes both a professional requirement and a survival necessity in circumstances where weakness or illness can quickly become life-threatening. Personal possessions beyond the basic necessities of clothing and shelter are luxuries that few women in your profession can afford, but small personal items, a comb, a piece of jewelry, a religious token, might serve important psychological functions by maintaining connections to identity and hope that extend beyond immediate survival concerns. The relationship with seasonal and temporary residents of your community creates opportunities for business that don't carry the same social complications as relationships with permanent local residents. Travelers, seasonal workers, and visitors provide income opportunities while offering less risk of ongoing social complications or reputation damage within your permanent community. Learning to manage the physical and emotional aftermath of violent encounters becomes an unfortunate but necessary skill. Medieval medicine offers little help for treating injuries, and the psychological support systems that modern society provides for trauma victims don't exist. Developing personal strategies for physical recovery and emotional healing allows you to continue working despite the cumulative effects of violence and abuse. The impact of weather and seasonal changes on your working conditions creates additional challenges that must be managed without resources that would be available to people in more secure circumstances. Cold weather makes outdoor work dangerous and uncomfortable, while also reducing the number of potential customers willing to brave harsh conditions. Wet weather makes finding dry places for conducting business more difficult and expensive. Managing relationships with the families and children of regular customers requires navigating complex social dynamics that could affect your safety and income. Some customers might want complete discretion about their use of your services, while others might be more open about these relationships. Understanding the domestic situations of your clients helps you avoid conflicts that could eliminate income sources or create dangerous enemies. The development of personal rules and boundaries that help maintain some sense of agency and self-respect within the constraints of your profession requires ongoing negotiation between economic necessity and personal values. These boundaries might involve refusing certain types of customers, limiting certain activities, or maintaining certain standards of treatment that help preserve psychological well-being, even when compromising them might increase income. Learning to recognize and respond to signs of sexually transmitted diseases becomes crucial for maintaining the health necessary to continue working. Medieval understanding of these conditions is limited and often incorrect, but practical experience teaches you to identify symptoms that might indicate serious health problems in yourself or your customers. The relationship with local religious figures, priests, monks, nuns, creates complex dynamics that reflect the tension between official church doctrine and practical social needs. Some religious authorities might view you with compassion as a sinner in need of salvation, others with condemnation as a source of moral corruption, and still others with practical acceptance as a necessary evil that serves social stability. Personal grooming and hygiene practices must be maintained with minimal resources and in conditions that don't facilitate cleanliness or health. Learning to stay as clean and attractive as possible using available materials and methods becomes both a professional necessity and a matter of personal dignity. The psychological challenge of maintaining hope and motivation in circumstances that offer little prospect for improvement requires inner resources that must be constantly renewed despite ongoing hardships. finding reasons to continue struggling for survival when survival itself involves ongoing degradation and danger tests human resilience in ways that most people never experience. Managing the social dynamics within communities of marginalized people requires skills that help you maintain necessary relationships while protecting yourself from the dangers that come with associating with other desperate people. Cooperation and competition exist simultaneously in these relationships, creating complex social negotiations that affect your safety and success. The impact of personal illness or injury on your ability to work creates economic crises that must be managed without the safety nets that protect people in more secure circumstances. When you can't work, you don't eat. And when you don't eat, you become weaker and less able to work, creating downward spirals that can quickly become fatal. Learning to assess the relative risks and benefits of different customer relationships helps you make decisions that balance immediate economic needs against long-term safety and sustainability. Some customers might offer higher payment, but greater risks of violence or disease, while others provide steady but modest income with lower associated dangers. The seasonal availability of food and other necessities affects your economic planning and survival strategies. Understanding when certain goods will be scarce and expensive helps you prepare for periods of hardship. Though your limited resources make meaningful preparation difficult even when you know problems are coming, personal relationships with people outside your profession, if any exist, require careful management to protect both parties from the social consequences of association with someone of your status. These relationships might provide emotional support and connections to mainstream society, but they also create vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies or competitors. The development of professional reputation within your customer base affects your earning potential and working conditions. A reputation for reliability, discretion, and appropriate services can lead to better customers and higher income, while a reputation for problems or conflicts can severely limit your opportunities. Managing the legal and social consequences of your profession requires understanding complex and often contradictory rules that govern your activities. Local laws, religious regulations, guild restrictions, and social customs all create different constraints and opportunities that must be navigated carefully to avoid serious consequences. The physical toll of your work accumulates over time in ways that affect your long-term health and earning potential. Repeated exposure to diseases, violence, and harsh working conditions creates health problems that become more serious as you age, while simultaneously reducing your ability to earn money for addressing those problems. Learning to recognize and respond to changes in local political and economic conditions helps you adjust your activities to take advantage of opportunities and avoid dangers. Wars, trade disputes, religious conflicts, and other large-scale events all create ripple effects that can dramatically impact your circumstances. Personal spiritual practices, if maintained, must be adapted to circumstances that mainstream religious institutions don't acknowledge or address. Finding ways to maintain spiritual connections and beliefs while engaging in activities that your religion condemns creates theological and psychological challenges that have no easy solutions. The management of personal trauma and emotional damage from your work requires developing coping strategies that allow you to continue functioning despite ongoing psychological stress. The dissociation and emotional numbing that help you survive day to day also create long-term psychological effects that compound over time. Understanding the broader economic and social systems that create demand for your services helps you predict changes in your market and adjust your strategies accordingly. Economic prosperity generally increases demand for your services, while economic hardship might reduce demand but also reduce competition as other survival strategies become available. The development of exit strategies, plans for leaving your profession if circumstances change, requires resources and opportunities that are rarely available to women in your situation. Even when leaving might be theoretically possible, the practical obstacles of finding alternative income, overcoming social stigma, and developing new skills make such transitions extremely difficult. Personal identity management becomes increasingly complex as the demands of your profession require you to suppress or modify aspects of your personality and desires that conflict with the services you provide. Maintaining some sense of authentic self while adapting to customer expectations and survival requirements creates ongoing psychological tension. The relationship with death becomes more immediate and practical than it is for most people. Violence, disease, accidents, and the general hazards of medieval life create constant awareness that death is a likely outcome of your circumstances. This awareness affects how you make decisions and what you consider worth risking or protecting. Learning to navigate the informal legal systems that govern relationships between marginalized people helps you resolve conflicts and maintain necessary cooperation without access to formal legal protections. These systems operate according to different rules than mainstream legal institutions and require different skills and strategies. The seasonal patterns of religious observance create predictable changes in social attitudes toward your profession that require adjustments in how you conduct business. Understanding when moral fervor is likely to peak and when practical tolerance is more likely helps you avoid unnecessary risks. Personal financial management with irregular income and no access to formal banking or saving institutions requires skills that help you maximize the value of money when you have it and survive periods when you don't. Learning to convert income into forms that hold value over time becomes crucial for managing the boom-bust cycles of your profession. The impact of aging on your professional prospects creates increasing urgency about finding alternative survival strategies as you become less attractive to customers and less able to handle the physical demands of your work. Planning for this inevitable decline requires resources and opportunities that are rarely available. Managing relationships with the children of women in similar professions, including potentially your own, creates additional responsibilities and concerns that complicate your survival strategies. Children in these circumstances face unique dangers and limited opportunities that require protection and planning you might not be able to provide. The development of professional skills beyond the obvious aspects of your work, negotiation, conflict resolution, resource management, risk assessment, represents valuable capabilities that unfortunately have limited application in other forms of employment available to women of your social status. Learning to maintain personal health and hygiene standards that protect both your professional viability and your personal dignity requires creativity and resourcefulness in circumstances that actively work against cleanliness and health. Finding ways to stay as healthy as possible becomes both a survival strategy and a form of self-respect. The psychological impact of social condemnation from religious and civil authorities affects your self-perception and mental health in ways that compound the other stresses of your profession. Internalizing society's judgment of your worth and moral status creates additional psychological burdens that must be managed alongside the practical challenges of survival. Understanding the legal and social distinctions between different types of sex work helps you navigate a complex system of regulations and social expectations that treat various forms of your profession differently. These distinctions affect everything from legal consequences to customer expectations to relationships with other women in similar situations. The management of personal relationships within the limited social circles available to someone of your status requires skills that help you maintain necessary connections while protecting yourself from the dangers that come with associating with other desperate and marginalized people. Personal safety planning for specific threats, violent customers, competitive rivals, hostile authorities, disease outbreaks, requires developing strategies that can be implemented quickly and effectively when dangers arise. These plans must account for your limited resources and restricted options while providing realistic protection. The seasonal migration of potential customers creates opportunities and challenges that require advanced planning and resource management. Understanding who travels when and why helps you position yourself to take advantage of temporary markets while avoiding the increased competition these opportunities attract. Learning to recognize and respond to changes in local social and political attitudes toward your profession helps you adjust your activities to minimize risks during periods of heightened enforcement or moral campaigns. These changes often follow predictable patterns related to political pressures and religious cycles. The development of personal standards and boundaries that help maintain psychological health and personal dignity within the constraints of your profession requires ongoing negotiation between survival needs and self-respect. These boundaries might involve refusing certain customers or activities, maintaining certain personal practices, or preserving certain aspects of privacy and autonomy. Managing the physical and emotional demands of working in conditions that would be considered hazardous and traumatic by any reasonable standard requires developing unusual resilience and coping strategies. The skills needed to survive in your profession are extraordinary, even if society refuses to acknowledge their value. And so your days pass, one after another, in a cycle of survival that tests human endurance in ways that comfortable people can't imagine. Each morning brings the same questions. Will you be safe today? Will you earn enough to eat? Will you live to see another dawn? Each evening brings the same uncertainties. Will tomorrow be better or worse? Will the customer who just left cause problems later? Will the authorities decide to make an example of someone like you? But let's get more specific about what those days actually look like, because the devil is in the details, and the details of medieval sex work are considerably more complicated than most people realize. Your typical day begins around 4 in the morning, not because you're an early riser by nature, but because sleep is a luxury that requires security you don't possess. The room you share with 3 other women, if you're lucky enough to have found such an arrangement, is cold, damp, and filled with the sounds of people who've learned that nightmares are preferable to being awake in their current circumstances. The first order of business is checking your body for new problems. Did that suspicious-looking sore get worse overnight? Is that pain in your abdomen something you can ignore for another day, or something that requires immediate attention you can't afford? Medieval medical knowledge being what it is, this self-examination is largely guesswork, but it's the only healthcare system available to someone in your profession. Next comes the daily negotiation with your roommates about who gets to use the single cracked mirror to make themselves presentable. This sounds trivial until you realize that your ability to earn money today depends partly on not looking like you've been sleeping on a pile of rags in a room that smells like unwashed bodies and despair. The mirror is fought over with the intensity of diplomats negotiating territory, because your appearance is literally your livelihood. Personal grooming with medieval resources would challenge a modern beauty consultant. You own one comb, which you've had to repair multiple times with bits of wire and hope. Your cosmetics consist of whatever you can scavenge or improvise: ash for darkening eyebrows, berry juice for coloring lips, flour for whitening skin if you can afford to waste food on vanity. The goal isn't to look beautiful by modern standards, but to look healthy enough that customers don't immediately assume you're diseased. Clothing maintenance is a daily crisis that requires the skills of a tailor, the creativity of an artist, and the patience of a saint. Your dress, the one good one, needs constant repair because customers aren't gentle, and you can't afford to replace anything. You've become expert at invisible mending, strategic patching, and making stains look like intentional decoration. The needle and thread you use for these repairs cost more than a day's food, so losing them would be a minor catastrophe. Breakfast, if it happens at all, is whatever you can afford or scavenge. This might be a piece of stale bread, a handful of grain porridge that tastes like liquid cardboard, or nothing at all if yesterday's earnings were insufficient. Hunger is a constant companion that you've learnt to ignore, but it makes everything harder. Thinking clearly, moving quickly, dealing with difficult customers without losing your temper. The morning reconnaissance mission involves walking through your territory to assess conditions for the day ahead, which streets are being watched by authorities, which alleys have been claimed by competitors, which areas have potential customers but manageable risks. This intelligence-gathering operation determines where you'll work, how you'll approach customers, and what backup plans you'll need if things go wrong. Customer evaluation begins the moment you spot a potential client. Age, clothing, apparent wealth, level of intoxication, body language, and a dozen other factors get processed instantly to determine whether this person represents opportunity or danger. You develop an eye for reading people that would impress modern psychologists, because making the wrong judgment about a customer can result in anything from non-payment to serious injury or death. The initial approach requires acting skills that would challenge professional performers. You need to project availability without appearing desperate, confidence without seeming threatening, attractiveness without looking expensive beyond the customer's means. The opening conversation determines not just whether you'll make a sale, but what price you can charge and how much danger you're accepting in exchange for income. Negotiation tactics vary depending on the customer, but they all involve balancing competing interests, getting the highest price possible while not pricing yourself out of the market, establishing terms that protect your safety while not scaring away business, and maintaining enough dignity to preserve your self-respect while acknowledging the reality of your circumstances. Location selection for conducting business requires considering privacy, safety, accessibility, and cost. A rented room offers comfort and security, but costs money you might not have. An alley provides privacy, but increases vulnerability to robbery or violence. A tavern offers some protection from other patrons, but increases the risk of official attention. Each choice involves trade-offs that affect both your immediate earnings and your long-term survival. The actual performance of services requires skills that go far beyond the physical aspects of sex work. You're simultaneously an actor, a therapist, an entertainer, and a security guard. Most customers want more than just physical services. They want the illusion of desire, the fantasy of being attractive and skilled, the temporary escape from whatever problems drove them to seek your services in the first place. Managing the physical discomfort and emotional dissociation required for this work becomes a practice skill that operates below conscious awareness. You learn to separate your mind from your body, to be present enough to perform your services competently while being absent enough to protect your psychological well-being. This dissociation becomes so automatic that it starts to affect other aspects of your life, making genuine intimacy or emotional connection increasingly difficult. Post-transaction procedures involve immediate safety assessment, payment verification, and damage control. Did the customer pay what was agreed? Are there any immediate health concerns that need attention? Did anyone witness the transaction who might cause problems later? These quick evaluations determine whether you can continue working or need to address immediate problems. Payment processing in a barter economy requires skills that modern accountants would recognize. Coins need to be evaluated for authenticity and purity. Goods need to be assessed for quality and resale value. Services or favors need to be weighed against immediate cash needs. You become expert at making these calculations quickly and accurately, because accepting worthless payment means you've worked for nothing. Customer management between transactions involves remembering preferences, maintaining appropriate boundaries, and managing expectations for future encounters. Regular customers expect to be remembered and treated with a level of personal attention that justifies their continued patronage. This requires emotional labor that extends beyond the paid encounters and creates additional psychological burdens. Competition management with other women in similar circumstances requires diplomatic skills that balance cooperation with self-interest. You need allies for protection and information sharing, but you're also competing for the same customers and locations. This creates complex social dynamics where friends can become enemies and enemies can become allies based on changing circumstances. Afternoon business typically involves different customers with different expectations than morning trade. Working men on lunch breaks want quick, inexpensive encounters. Merchants conducting business want more elaborate services that justify higher prices. Travelers passing through town represent one-time opportunities that might warrant special effort or unusual services. Risk assessment becomes a constant background process that evaluates everything from weather conditions to political developments for their potential impact on your safety and income. Approaching storm might mean fewer customers but also fewer witnesses to dangerous encounters. A religious festival might mean increased moral fervor and enforcement activities. A military unit passing through town might mean increased business opportunities but also increased risks of violence. Health monitoring requires attention to symptoms and conditions that could affect your ability to work or pose risks to customers. Medieval understanding of sexually transmitted diseases is minimal, but practical experience teaches you to recognize problems that might indicate serious health issues. Managing these concerns without access to medical care requires both practical knowledge and considerable luck. Evening planning involves assessing the day's earnings, planning for tomorrow's activities, and managing immediate needs for food, shelter, and safety. Did you earn enough today to afford a room tonight, or will you be sleeping rough? Do you have enough money for food tomorrow, or will you need to work despite illness or exhaustion? These daily calculations determine your immediate survival and long-term prospects. Social interaction with other marginalized people provides both companionship and information exchange that helps everyone navigate the challenges of survival on society's edges. These relationships involve complex negotiations between self-interest and mutual aid, cooperation and competition, trust and suspicion that reflect the precarious circumstances everyone shares. Personal maintenance activities that get squeezed into whatever time and privacy are available include basic hygiene, clothing repair, and the small personal rituals that help maintain psychological well-being. These activities might seem insignificant, but they represent attempts to maintain dignity and humanity in circumstances that actively undermine both. Evening customer interactions often involve different dynamics than daytime business. Men who've been drinking are more likely to be violent but also more likely to pay premium prices. Customers seeking discretion might offer better compensation but also create additional risks if their need for secrecy indicates dangerous personal circumstances. Territory management becomes more complex as the day progresses and competition for prime locations intensifies. Early morning spots might be abandoned in favor of locations that offer better afternoon opportunities. Evening might require moving again to areas where nighttime customers are more likely to be found. Each move requires assessing new risks and opportunities. Sleep preparation involves finding safe locations, securing your possessions, and managing the physical and emotional aftermath of the day's work. Safe sleeping locations are scarce and often expensive relative to your income. Your possessions need to be hidden or guarded, because theft is a constant threat. Processing the psychological impact of the day's encounters requires coping strategies that allow you to rest despite trauma and stress. Weather management affects every aspect of your work, from customer volume to working conditions to health concerns. Rain means fewer customers, but also increases the cost of finding dry places to conduct business. Cold weather makes outdoor work dangerous and uncomfortable, while also reducing foot traffic. Heat creates health problems and increases the difficulty of maintaining acceptable appearance standards. Seasonal business cycles create predictable patterns that require advanced planning despite limited resources. Spring brings agricultural workers to town with money to spend, but also increases competition as women who've survived winter return to work. Summer brings the highest volume of travelers and merchants, but also the greatest competition for their business. Autumn harvest celebrations mean increased business, but also increased scrutiny from authorities preparing for winter moral campaigns. Customer service skills extend far beyond the physical aspects of your work to include conversation, emotional support, and the ability to make people feel attractive and valued despite their obvious flaws. Many customers want to talk about their problems, their fears, their disappointments. Providing this emotional labor while maintaining appropriate boundaries requires skills that few people need to develop. Financial planning with irregular income involves developing strategies for managing money when you have it and surviving when you don't. This might mean paying for a week's worth of room and board when you have a good day, or finding ways to stretch a single meal across multiple days when earnings are poor. The boom-bust cycles of your profession make conventional financial planning impossible. Injury management, without access to medical care, requires practical knowledge of basic first aid, and the ability to distinguish between problems that will heal themselves and those that require immediate attention. Minor cuts and bruises are occupational hazards that you learn to treat with whatever materials are available. More serious injuries present choices between continuing to work while hurt or losing income while healing. Personal relationship management becomes increasingly complex as your profession affects every social interaction. Family members might disown you, friends might abandon you, and potential romantic partners might be deterred by your circumstances. The few relationships that survive require careful management to protect both parties from the social consequences of association. Professional reputation management within your customer base affects your earning potential and working conditions. Word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied customers can lead to increased business and higher prices. Negative reports about poor service or conflicts can severely limit your opportunities. Managing this informal rating system requires consistent performance and careful handling of dissatisfied customers. Legal risk management involves understanding the complex and often contradictory laws that govern your activities and developing strategies for avoiding serious legal consequences. Local regulations might prohibit your profession while tacitly allowing it under certain circumstances. Religious laws might condemn your activities while civil authorities ignore them for practical reasons. Navigating these contradictions requires constant attention to changing political and social conditions. Personal safety protocols develop based on experience and shared knowledge from other women in similar circumstances. These might include working in pairs when possible, avoiding customers who show signs of violence, staying in areas where help might be available if needed, and maintaining escape routes from locations where you conduct business. These precautions become automatic responses that operate below conscious awareness. Resource management involves making the most efficient use of limited money, time, and energy to maximize survival chances. This might mean choosing between spending money on food or saving it for rent, between working while sick or losing income while resting, between maintaining important relationships or focusing entirely on earning money. These choices have both immediate and long-term consequences that affect your overall prospects. Skill development continues throughout your career as you learn new techniques for managing customers, avoiding dangers, and maximizing income. These skills might include improved negotiation tactics, better methods for assessing customer reliability, or more effective ways of managing violent situations. The learning curve is steep because mistakes can be fatal, but survival requires constant adaptation and improvement. Psychological coping strategies evolve as the cumulative effects of your work create mental health challenges that must be managed without professional help. These might include dissociation techniques that protect your sense of self during difficult encounters, rationalization methods that help you maintain some sense of dignity despite your circumstances, or escape fantasies that provide temporary relief from present realities. Social navigation within marginalized communities requires understanding the complex hierarchies and relationships that exist among people on society's edges. Other sex workers might be competitors, allies, or sources of information depending on circumstances. Criminals might be protectors, customers, or threats. Merchants might be essential service providers or sources of exploitation. Managing these relationships requires diplomatic skills and constant assessment of changing dynamics. Personal identity management becomes increasingly important as the demands of your profession require you to suppress or modify aspects of your personality that conflict with customer expectations or survival requirements. Maintaining some sense of authentic self while adapting to external pressures requires psychological resources that must be constantly renewed despite ongoing stress and trauma. Economic opportunity assessment involves recognizing and evaluating potential income sources beyond your primary profession. These might include occasional work in taverns or shops, providing services like laundry or sewing when possible, or serving as informants for authorities or criminals who value your access to information from various social levels. Diversifying income sources provides some protection against the uncertainties of sex work. Crisis management skills become essential for handling the emergencies that regularly occur in your profession and social circumstances. These might include violent customers, competitive conflicts, legal troubles, health emergencies, or sudden changes in local conditions that affect your safety or income. Developing effective responses to these crises often means the difference between temporary setbacks and permanent disaster. Long-term survival planning requires balancing immediate needs against uncertain future prospects. This might involve setting aside small amounts of money when possible, maintaining relationships that might provide help in emergencies, or developing skills that could potentially lead to other forms of employment. The challenge is that long-term planning requires resources and opportunities that are rarely available to someone in your circumstances. Personal hygiene management with minimal resources requires creativity and resourcefulness that would challenge modern people accustomed to abundant water and cleaning supplies. Staying clean enough to attract customers while having limited access to water, soap, and privacy requires innovative approaches and constant attention to efficiency. The consequences of poor hygiene affect both your health and your earning potential. Professional networking within the broader community of people who work in marginalized occupations creates opportunities for mutual support and information sharing. Relationships with tavern keepers, street vendors, minor criminals, and others who operate outside mainstream society can provide access to customers, information about opportunities and dangers, and assistance in emergencies. Seasonal health management involves preparing for the predictable health challenges that come with changing weather and economic conditions. Winter brings increased risks of cold-related illness and respiratory problems. Summer creates heat-related health problems and increases the spread of diseases. Each season requires different survival strategies and health precautions. Customer retention strategies help maintain relationships with reliable clients who provide steady income and relatively predictable working conditions. This might involve remembering personal details about regular customers, providing services or attention that go beyond the basic transaction, or offering incentives that encourage continued patronage. Managing these relationships requires balancing personal boundaries with business needs. Competitive intelligence gathering helps you understand the strategies and activities of other women in similar circumstances, so you can adjust your own approach to maximize advantages and minimize conflicts. This information might concern pricing strategies, customer preferences, territory agreements, or safety concerns that affect everyone in your profession. Personal boundary management becomes increasingly important as the demands of survival create pressure to accept customers or services that conflict with your personal values or safety concerns. Maintaining some limits on what you're willing to do helps preserve psychological well-being and self-respect, but these boundaries must be balanced against economic necessity and survival requirements. Crisis recovery strategies help you rebuild after setbacks that temporarily disrupt your ability to work or earn money. These might include recovering from injuries, rebuilding after conflicts with competitors or authorities, or re-establishing yourself after being forced to relocate. The ability to recover quickly from disasters often determines long-term survival prospects. Information management involves controlling what customers, competitors, and authorities know about your activities, relationships, and circumstances. Too much information in the wrong hands can create dangers or reduce your negotiating power. Too little information can limit opportunities for beneficial relationships or assistance. Managing this balance requires constant attention to who knows what about your situation. Personal skill development beyond the obvious aspects of your profession might include improving your ability to read people quickly, learning basic medical or healing knowledge, developing facility with different languages or dialects, or acquiring knowledge about local politics and economics that helps you navigate changing conditions. Community relationship management involves maintaining appropriate connections with the broader society that both condemns and utilizes your services. This might include relationships with merchants who provide goods and services, officials who might provide protection or information, or religious figures who might offer assistance or moral guidance. These relationships require careful navigation to avoid conflicts or exploitation. Personal health advocacy becomes necessary when you develop medical problems that require treatment but lack access to qualified medical care. This might involve seeking help from other women with similar experiences, consulting with folk healers or herbalists, or trying to access medical attention through unofficial channels. Managing health problems without proper care requires both practical knowledge and considerable luck. Professional development within your field might involve learning new services or techniques that allow you to charge higher prices or attract better customers, developing specializations that differentiate you from competitors, or improving your ability to manage difficult situations and dangerous customers. Continuous improvement is necessary for long-term survival in a competitive and dangerous profession. Personal safety training involves developing the physical and mental skills needed to protect yourself from violence and exploitation. This might include learning to recognize warning signs of potential violence, developing physical techniques for self-defense, or creating safety protocols that reduce your vulnerability to attack. These skills must be constantly practiced and updated based on changing circumstances. Resource allocation strategies help you make the most efficient use of limited money, time, and energy to maximize your survival chances and quality of life. This involves making complex decisions about spending priorities, time management, and energy expenditure that balance immediate needs against long-term sustainability. Poor resource allocation can quickly lead to crisis situations that threaten survival. Personal relationship maintenance with the few people who remain in your life despite your profession requires special attention and care. These relationships provide emotional support and social connections that help maintain psychological health, but they also create responsibilities and vulnerabilities that must be managed carefully to protect both parties from harm. Professional ethics development involves creating personal standards and guidelines that help you maintain some sense of dignity and self-respect while working in circumstances that constantly challenge both. These ethics might concern how you treat customers, how you compete with other women, or what services you're willing to provide. Maintaining ethical standards requires constant negotiation between principles and survival needs. Emergency planning involves developing strategies for handling the various crises that regularly occur in your profession and social circumstances. These plans might address violent customers, competitive conflicts, legal troubles, health emergencies, or sudden changes in local conditions. Having prepared responses to common emergencies can mean the difference between minor setbacks and major disasters. Personal identity preservation becomes increasingly challenging as the demands of your profession require you to suppress or modify aspects of your personality and values that conflict with customer expectations or survival requirements. Maintaining some sense of authentic self while adapting to external pressures requires psychological resources that must be constantly renewed despite ongoing stress and trauma. The cumulative effects of this lifestyle begin to show themselves after months and years of survival at society's margins. Your body bears the marks of violence, disease, and hard living. Your mind carries the weight of constant stress, trauma, and the psychological dissociation required to perform work that your upbringing taught you was sinful and degrading. Your spirit, whatever remains of it, exists in a state of constant vigilance against threats that come from all directions. Yet somehow, you continue. Day after day, month after month, you find ways to survive circumstances that would break most people. You adapt to conditions that change constantly and unpredictably. You maintain enough hope to get up each morning and enough determination to face whatever that day brings. The world around you continues its medieval existence, largely indifferent to your struggles. Kings fight wars over territory and titles. Priests preach sermons about sin and salvation. Merchants conduct business and accumulate wealth. Farmers plant crops and raise livestock. Normal people live normal lives, secure in their social positions and their place in the divine order of things. You exist in the spaces between their normal world, in the shadows and margins where polite society pretends not to look. You provide services that everyone knows about but no one discusses publicly. You serve needs that everyone understands but no one acknowledges officially. You survive on the tolerance of a society that simultaneously requires your services and condemns your existence. The practical realities of your daily existence would be impossible for comfortable people to understand or accept. The constant calculations of risk and reward, the endless negotiations between dignity and survival, the daily compromises between what you want to do and what you must do to stay alive. These become so automatic that you stop conscious of making them. Your relationship with your own body becomes purely instrumental. It's the tool you use to earn money, the commodity you sell to survive, the vessel that carries you through each dangerous day. Personal pleasure, physical comfort, and bodily autonomy become luxuries you can't afford. Your body belongs to whoever pays for access to it, for however long they pay, under whatever conditions they demand. Your relationship with your own mind requires careful management to prevent complete psychological breakdown. The dissociation techniques that help you survive daily encounters also create barriers to genuine human connection. The emotional numbing that protects you from psychological trauma also makes it difficult to experience joy, hope, or love. The hypervigilance that keeps you safe also makes rest and relaxation nearly impossible. Your relationship with other people becomes filtered through the lens of survival necessity. Everyone you meet is evaluated for their potential utility or danger. Genuine friendship becomes nearly impossible because trust is a luxury you can't afford, and vulnerability is a weakness that can be exploited. Even your relationships with other women in similar circumstances are complicated by competition and the knowledge that desperation can make anyone dangerous. Your relationship with the future becomes limited to immediate concerns. Long-term planning is pointless when you might not survive the next encounter. Dreams and aspirations are mental luxuries that use energy needed for survival. Hope becomes a dangerous emotion that can lead to poor decision-making. You learn to live entirely in the present moment, focused on immediate threats and opportunities. Your relationship with your past becomes a source of pain that must be carefully managed. Memories of who you were before, of family and home and innocence, create psychological suffering that serves no survival purpose. You learn to suppress these memories, to live as if your current existence is all that has ever been or ever will be. The person you were before becomes a ghost that you can't afford to acknowledge. The seasonal cycles of medieval life create predictable patterns in your work and survival strategies, but they also serve as markers of time passing and life being consumed by circumstances beyond your control. Each winter represents another year of survival, but also another year further removed from any possibility of change or escape. Each spring brings renewed hope for better conditions, but experience teaches you that hope is usually disappointed. The religious calendar that governs medieval society creates additional complications for your survival. Holy days might bring moral fervor that increases risks of persecution, but they also create opportunities for increased business as people seek to atone for their sins through extreme indulgence. Lent brings official disapproval of your profession, but it also creates demand from people who want to experience forbidden pleasures before giving them up for religious observance. The economic cycles that affect everyone in medieval society have particularly severe impacts on someone in your position. Good harvests mean more money in circulation and increased demand for your services. Bad harvests mean economic hardship that reduces demand but also increases competition. As other survival strategies become unavailable, wars create opportunities through increased numbers of soldiers with money to spend, but they also create dangers through social instability and reduced law enforcement. The social dynamics of medieval community life create both opportunities and dangers for someone in your position. You know secrets about respectable citizens that could be valuable if used carefully, but dangerous if revealed inappropriately. You have access to information from multiple social levels that might be useful to various parties, but could also make you a target for elimination. You understand the gap between public morality and private behavior in ways that make you both valuable and threatening to established power structures. Your practical knowledge of human nature, developed through constant exposure to people under stress and in compromising situations, would be valuable in many contexts. If you had access to those contexts, you understand motivation, desperation, weakness, and self-deception in ways that would impress philosophers and psychologists. But this knowledge is trapped within social circumstances that prevent it from being applied to legitimate purposes. Your survival skills, developed through constant exposure to danger and scarcity, represent a form of expertise that few people need to develop. You can assess threats quickly and accurately, manage limited resources efficiently, navigate complex social dynamics skillfully, and maintain psychological stability under conditions of extreme stress. These are valuable abilities that unfortunately have limited application outside the margins of society. Your understanding of economic relationships, developed through constant negotiation and resource management, gives you insights into human behavior and social systems that would be valuable in many contexts. You understand supply and demand, risk and reward, negotiation and compromise in immediate, practical ways that academic theorists rarely achieve. But again, this knowledge is trapped within circumstances that prevent its legitimate application. The irony of your situation is that survival in your profession requires developing exactly the kinds of skills, intelligence, resourcefulness, adaptability, courage, persistence that society claims to value. But developing those skills in your context makes them inadmissible for use in more respectable circumstances. You become highly capable in ways that can't be acknowledged or rewarded by the society that forced you to develop those capabilities. As days turn into months and months into years, the cumulative effects of your lifestyle create changes that become increasingly difficult to hide or ignore. Physical deterioration from violence, disease, and harsh living conditions makes you less attractive to customers and less able to compete with younger women entering the profession. Psychological damage from trauma and stress affects your ability to interact normally with people and society. Social isolation becomes more complete, as the few remaining connections to mainstream society are severed or abandoned. The knowledge that your profession has no retirement plan and no pension system creates additional psychological pressure that must be managed alongside the daily stresses of survival. You know that aging will eventually make your services less desirable and your situation more desperate, but you also know that alternative survival strategies are largely unavailable to someone with your social status and lack of resources. The awareness that death is a likely outcome of your circumstances becomes more immediate and practical as time passes. Violence, disease, accident, and the cumulative effects of harsh living conditions all represent probable causes of early death. This awareness affects how you make decisions and what you consider worth preserving or protecting, but it also creates additional psychological burdens that compound the other stresses of your existence. The gradual erosion of whatever hopes or dreams you might have maintained becomes another form of loss that must be grieved and accepted. The person you might have become in different circumstances becomes a ghost that haunts your present reality. The life you might have lived becomes a fantasy that provides temporary escape, but also creates additional pain when reality intrudes. The progressive isolation from normal human experiences and relationships creates a form of living death that precedes physical death. Love, friendship, family, community, purpose, meaning, all the things that make life worth living become increasingly distant and unattainable. You survive, but survival becomes its own form of punishment, an endless repetition of degradation and danger without hope for change or escape. Yet somehow, against all odds and reason, you continue. Each morning you wake up and choose to face another day rather than giving up entirely. Each evening you find ways to endure whatever that day has brought and prepare for whatever tomorrow might hold. Each season you adapt to changing conditions and discover new strategies for survival. The resilience required for this existence represents a form of human strength that comfortable people rarely need to develop or understand. The ability to continue functioning under conditions of extreme stress, constant danger, and repeated trauma requires inner resources that most people never know they possess. The capacity to maintain some sense of self and humanity while being systematically dehumanized by circumstances and society represents a kind of heroism that is never acknowledged or rewarded. Your story, repeated with variations by thousands of women throughout medieval Europe, represents one of history's great untold narratives of survival and endurance. The daily reality of life at society's margins, the human cost of economic systems that offer some people few or no legitimate survival options, the psychological and physical toll of social marginalization. These themes are largely absent from the historical record, because the people who lived them were considered unworthy of attention or remembrance. But their stories matter, not because their profession was admirable, or their choices were good, but because their survival under impossible circumstances demonstrates something important about human resilience, and the lengths to which people will go to preserve their lives when all other options have been exhausted. Their experiences illuminate the harsh realities of historical periods that are often romanticized in popular culture and academic study. The medieval world that produced your circumstances was not a time of chivalry and romance, but a brutal survival environment where most people lived short, hard lives dominated by violence, disease, and scarcity. Your profession represents one extreme example of how people adapted to these conditions, but it reflects broader patterns of desperation and marginalization that affected millions of people who never appear in the historical record. Understanding your daily reality, the practical challenges, the psychological costs, the social dynamics, the economic relationships, provides insights into both medieval society and human nature that are available nowhere else. Your story is not inspiring or uplifting, but it is true, and truth has value even when it is uncomfortable or disturbing. So there you have it, the unglamorous, uncomfortable, complicated truth about what medieval prostitutes actually did all day. Not the romanticized version you might see in movies or read in novels, but the grinding reality of survival in circumstances that tested human endurance to its limits. The daily routine of managing customers, avoiding violence, finding food and shelter, maintaining health and appearance, navigating legal and social dangers, and preserving some small sense of humanity in the face of constant dehumanization. It wasn't a life anyone would choose if better options were available. It wasn't a profession that provided fulfillment or dignity or meaningful human connection. It was simply a survival strategy employed by desperate people in desperate circumstances, a way of staying alive when all other doors had been closed. The women who lived these lives deserved to be remembered not for their profession, but for their stubborn refusal to die when everything in their world seemed designed to kill them. Their survival represents a kind of victory over circumstances that would have defeated most people, even if it was a victory that came at a price too high for anyone to pay willingly. Sweet dreams, and perhaps tonight you'll appreciate not just your comfortable bed and secure shelter, but the social systems and economic opportunities that make survival possible without requiring such desperate measures. But before we let you drift off to sleep, let's explore some of the more specific and gritty details that really illuminate what made this existence so particularly miserable. Because the devil, as they say, is in the details, and medieval sex work had devils lurking in every corner. Take, for instance, the charming reality of medieval personal hygiene, when your profession requires intimate contact with strangers who haven't bathed since the previous century. Water costs money, soap costs more money, privacy for bathing costs money you definitely don't have, so you develop creative solutions that would horrify modern germaphobes and probably violate several health codes that won't be invented for another 600 years. Your daily bath consists of whatever water you can scrounge, heated over whatever fire you can access, in whatever container you can borrow or steal. This might be a cracked pottery bowl, a dented metal basin, or if you're particularly unlucky, the same bucket someone else used to clean chamber pots. The water itself might come from a well, a stream, or a puddle that's only slightly more questionable than the customers you'll be serving. Soap, when you can afford it, is a luxury item made from animal fat and wood ash that smells roughly like what you'd imagine the inside of a tannery would smell like after a fire. It's harsh enough to remove skin along with dirt, and expensive enough that you use it sparingly. Most days your cleaning routine involves scrubbing yourself with a wet rag, and hoping that whatever parasites you've acquired don't become immediately obvious to paying customers. The clothing situation deserves special attention because it represents one of your most significant ongoing challenges. You own 2 dresses, the one you're wearing and the one that's being mended, washed, or worn by someone who borrowed it in exchange for a favor you'd rather not think about. Medieval fashion for women of your social class consists of whatever doesn't fall apart immediately and whatever doesn't make you look like a plague victim. Your good dress, and the term good here is relative, has been repaired so many times that it's more thread than original fabric. You've become an expert at invisible mending, strategic patching, and making bloodstains look like decorative embroidery. The needle and thread required for these repairs cost more than food, so losing your sewing supplies would constitute a minor economic disaster. Your undergarments, such as they are, consist of whatever scraps of cloth you can find or afford. Medieval women don't have access to anything resembling modern underwear, so you're working with strips of linen or wool that you wrap, tie, and hope stay in place during whatever gymnastics your customers might require. These improvised undergarments serve multiple purposes: modesty, warmth, and absorption of various bodily fluids that are inevitable in your line of work. Shoes represent another ongoing challenge that affects every aspect of your daily existence. Good shoes cost more than you earn in several months, so you're working with whatever footwear you can find, steal, or improvise. This might be wooden clogs that give you splinters, leather boots that leak and smell like the animals they came from, or cloth wrappings that provide minimal protection against medieval streets that serve as open sewers. Medieval streets, speaking of which, are not the charming cobblestone pathways you see in movies. They're muddy, filthy channels for human and animal waste, rotting food, and various industrial byproducts that medieval sanitation systems can't handle. Walking these streets in inadequate footwear means your feet are constantly wet, cold, and exposed to diseases that medieval medicine can't identify, much less treat. The geography of your working life is determined by a complex interplay of safety, opportunity, and competition that changes daily based on factors beyond your control. Prime locations near markets, taverns, or gates where travelers enter the city are contested territory that might be claimed by more established women, controlled by criminal organizations, or monitored by authorities who need to occasionally demonstrate their commitment to public morality. Your territory might be a particular alley, a section of street, or a corner of the market square that offers the right combination of visibility to customers and concealment from authorities. Establishing and maintaining claims to these locations requires negotiation skills, physical courage, and sometimes violence that most medieval women never need to develop. The competition for these prime locations creates a parallel economy of favors, threats, and alliances among women in your profession. You might trade information about dangerous customers for access to a better working spot. You might share the cost of bribing a guard in exchange for protection during particularly risky times. You might form temporary partnerships for safety during dangerous encounters, or to pool resources for expenses like room rental or medical attention. But these same potential allies are also your direct competitors for the same pool of customers. A woman who's friendly and helpful during the day might sabotage your negotiations with a customer in the evening if she needs the money more than she values your relationship. Trust becomes a luxury you can't afford, and friendship becomes a risk that might cost you your livelihood or your life. The customer base for your services represents a cross-section of medieval society that would fascinate sociologists if sociology existed yet. Your clientele includes everyone from wealthy merchants who can afford premium services, to apprentice craftsmen spending their first wages, to soldiers on leave who might pay with looted goods instead of money. Each category of customer presents different challenges and opportunities that require different strategies and precautions. Wealthy customers might pay well, but they also have social standing to protect, and might become violent if they think you pose a threat to their reputations. Poor customers might be more respectful because they understand desperation, but they also might not be able to pay what they've promised. Foreign customers might not understand local customs or pricing, creating opportunities for higher profits, but also misunderstandings that could lead to conflicts. Soldiers represent a particularly complex customer category because they combine access to money with training in violence and experience with death that makes them potentially very dangerous. A soldier who's recently returned from campaign might have coins to spend, but also psychological trauma that makes him unpredictable. A soldier who hasn't been paid in months might be desperate enough to take your services by force rather than negotiating payment. Religious pilgrims create another interesting customer category because they combine spiritual fervor with human desires in ways that create cognitive dissonance and potential complications. A pilgrim might seek your services as a form of spiritual testing, as a way of atoning for sins through additional sinning, or simply because long journeys create human needs that spiritual devotion can't eliminate. These customers might pay well because they're trying to buy absolution along with services, but they also might become violent because they're conflicted about their desires. Local residents who use your services regularly create ongoing relationships that require careful management to balance business needs with personal safety. These customers know where to find you, understand your pricing and services, and might provide steady income over time. But they also know enough about your circumstances to potentially exploit or harm you, and their familiarity might breed contempt that leads to reduced payments or increased demands. The actual business transactions involve negotiations that would challenge modern salespeople and require skills that few medieval women had opportunities to develop in other contexts. You need to quickly assess a customer's ability to pay, willingness to pay, potential for violence, and specific desires. Then negotiate terms that maximize your income while minimizing your risks. These negotiations take place in public spaces where being overheard could create problems with authorities or competitors. So you develop a vocabulary of euphemisms and coded language that allows you to conduct business discussions without explicitly acknowledging what's being bought and sold. This coded language also helps customers maintain the fiction that they're not engaging in activities their society officially condemns. Payment negotiations involve not just the amount of money, but the form of payment, the timing of payment, and the consequences of non-payment. Medieval economies operate on barter as much as currency, so you might be offered payment in goods, services, or favors that need to be evaluated for their real value and convertibility to things you actually need. A loaf of bread is great if you're hungry, but it doesn't help with rent. A piece of cloth is useful if you need clothing repairs, but it can't be eaten. A promise of future payment might be worthless if the customer disappears or if his circumstances change. Learning to evaluate these alternative forms of payment quickly and accurately becomes crucial for avoiding transactions that waste your time and energy. The timing of payment creates additional complications because customers might not have money immediately available, might want to pay after services are rendered, or might be using the promise of payment to obtain services they can't actually afford. Demanding payment in advance protects you from fraud, but might scare away legitimate customers who don't carry money openly in dangerous areas. Accepting payment after services are rendered exposes you to customers who might refuse to pay once they've gotten what they wanted. The physical locations where you conduct business present their own unique challenges that affect everything from pricing to safety to customer satisfaction. A rented room offers privacy and comfort but costs money that reduces your profit margin. An alley provides concealment from authorities but also creates opportunities for robbery or assault. A tavern offers some protection from other patrons but increases the risk of official attention and limits the services you can provide. Each location requires different strategies for managing customers, handling problems, and ensuring your safety. In a rented room, you have some control over the environment, but also responsibility for any damage or problems that occur. In public spaces, you have less control, but also less financial risk. In taverns or other establishments, you might have protection from the proprietor, but also obligations to share profits or provide additional services. The seasonal variations in your business create predictable patterns that require advanced planning despite your limited resources. Winter brings fewer customers because travel is dangerous and money is scarce, but it also brings people seeking warmth and companionship during the coldest, darkest months. You might adjust your pricing to account for reduced demand, or you might focus on providing services that emphasize warmth and comfort over other considerations. Spring brings agricultural workers to town with money to spend, but it also brings increased competition as women who've barely survived winter return to work. The combination of increased demand and increased supply creates market conditions that require careful navigation to maintain your income levels while avoiding conflicts with competitors. Summer brings the highest volume of travelers and merchants, creating the best opportunities for income, but also the greatest competition for customers. The longer days provide more working hours, but the heat creates health problems and makes maintaining acceptable appearance standards more difficult. The increased activity also brings increased attention from authorities who might be under pressure to demonstrate their commitment to public morality. Autumn brings harvest workers with seasonal income and celebration festivals that create opportunities for increased business, but it also brings communities preparing for winter religious observances that might include moral campaigns targeting your profession. The timing of these campaigns often coincides with your most profitable season, creating conflicts between maximizing income and minimizing legal risks. The relationship with local authorities involves complex dynamics that change based on political pressures, economic conditions, and the personal interests of individual officials. Officially, your profession is illegal and sinful. Practically, it serves social functions that authorities recognize, even if they can't acknowledge them publicly. Individual guards, magistrates, and other officials might be customers, protectors, or persecutors depending on their personal interests and the political climate. A guard who's been bribed to look the other way during normal times might be forced to crack down during periods of moral fervor. A magistrate who's personally tolerant of your profession might be required to prosecute cases when political pressure demands visible enforcement of moral standards. Understanding these shifting dynamics requires constant attention to local politics and social conditions. Religious festivals, economic problems, political upheavals, and other large-scale events all create pressures that affect how authorities interact with marginalized populations. Learning to read these signs and adjust your activities accordingly can mean the difference between profitable business and serious legal trouble. The legal consequences of being caught in your profession vary widely depending on local laws, current political conditions, and the specific circumstances of your arrest. Penalties might range from fines you can't afford to public humiliation that could end your ability to earn money in that location. More serious consequences might include physical punishment, imprisonment, or banishment from the community. The arbitrary nature of law enforcement in medieval times means that identical activities might be ignored, punished lightly, or punished severely, depending on factors beyond your control. The same guard who ignored your activities yesterday might arrest you today because his supervisor is demanding visible enforcement. The same magistrate who dismissed charges last month might impose harsh penalties this month because political pressures have changed. The social stigma attached to your profession creates isolation that affects every aspect of your life beyond work. Normal social relationships become nearly impossible to maintain because respectable people can't be seen associating with you without damaging their own reputations. Family relationships, if any survive from your previous life, are typically severed because maintaining connections across the social divide is too complicated and dangerous for most people to navigate. This isolation extends to basic social services and business relationships that most people take for granted. Merchants might refuse to serve you, charge higher prices, or provide inferior goods because they know you have limited alternatives. Landlords might refuse to rent to you or charge premium prices for substandard accommodations. Medical care, such as it exists in medieval times, might be denied entirely or provided only under conditions that further compromise your dignity and safety. The psychological toll of this systematic dehumanization compounds the other stresses of your profession in ways that affect your mental health and your ability to form meaningful relationships with other people. Being constantly treated as less than human by the society around you makes it difficult to maintain your own sense of worth and humanity. The physical demands of your work extend beyond the obvious sexual aspects to include the stamina required for long working hours, the strength needed to defend yourself when necessary, and the resilience required to recover from injuries and illness without adequate medical care. Medieval life is physically demanding for everyone, but your profession adds additional stresses that accelerate the aging process and increase your vulnerability to health problems. Violence is a constant threat that shapes every aspect of your daily routine and requires constant vigilance and strategic planning. Customers might become violent if they're dissatisfied with services, if they want to avoid payment, or if they're influenced by alcohol or other factors that reduce their self-control. Competitors might use violence to eliminate competition for prime locations or desirable customers. Criminals might target you because they perceive sex workers as easy victims who can't seek help from authorities. The types of violence you face range from simple robbery to sexual assault, to potentially fatal attacks by customers or competitors who view you as less than human, learning to recognize warning signs of potential violence, developing strategies for avoiding dangerous situations, and acquiring skills for defending yourself when avoidance isn't possible become essential survival skills that most medieval women never need to develop. Your personal possessions, such as they are, must be portable and easily concealed, because permanent residences and secure storage are luxuries you can't afford. Everything you own must fit into a small bag that you can carry easily and hide quickly when necessary. This includes not just clothing and personal items, but also your working supplies, cosmetics, cleaning materials, contraceptive herbs, and whatever tools or weapons you use for personal protection. The constant threat of theft means that anything valuable must be hidden or disguised to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Money, when you have any, might be sewn into clothing, buried in hidden locations, or converted into less obvious forms of wealth, like jewelry or useful goods. The challenge is balancing security with accessibility, hiding your money so well that thieves can't find it, but not so well that you can't access it quickly when needed. Personal relationships within the community of marginalized people create both opportunities for mutual support and additional sources of stress and conflict. Other women in similar circumstances might be allies who share information and provide protection, but they're also competitors who might sabotage your relationships with customers if they need money more than they value your friendship. Criminal organizations that control various aspects of illegal activities in medieval cities might offer protection and access to customers in exchange for a percentage of your earnings, but they also create obligations and risks that can become more dangerous than the problems they're supposed to solve. Being under the protection of criminals means being subject to their rules and their conflicts with other criminal organizations. Tavern keepers, inn proprietors, and other business owners who cater to travelers and workers might provide locations for conducting business or information about potential customers. But these relationships also create dependencies that can be exploited. A tavern keeper who allows you to work in his establishment expects compensation in money, services, or favors that reduce your income and increase your vulnerabilities. The informal networks of information sharing among marginalized people provide crucial intelligence about opportunities and dangers, but they also create obligations and expose you to risks associated with other people's activities. Knowing which customers are dangerous, which officials can be bribed, which areas are safe, and which competitors are threatening, requires maintaining relationships with people who have access to this information. The health challenges specific to your profession go far beyond the obvious risks of sexually transmitted diseases, to include the physical trauma of violence, the effects of poor nutrition and inadequate shelter, and the psychological stress of constant fear and degradation. Medieval medicine has limited understanding of any of these problems and virtually no effective treatments for most of them. Pregnancy represents a catastrophic risk that can end your ability to work and possibly your life. Medieval contraception consists mainly of herbal remedies of questionable effectiveness and timing methods that require knowledge most women don't possess. When prevention fails, your options are limited to dangerous procedures performed by people with no medical training or carrying the pregnancy to term in a world where childbirth kills roughly 1 woman in 10. If you survive childbirth, the responsibility of caring for a child while maintaining your ability to work creates impossible choices between economic survival and parental responsibilities. Medieval society provides no support systems for unmarried mothers, especially those engaged in illegal professions. The child becomes another mouth to feed, with income that's already insufficient for your own survival. Sexually transmitted diseases, while not understood in medical terms that won't be developed for centuries, are recognized as occupational hazards that can severely impact your health and earning potential. Visible symptoms make you less attractive to customers and might indicate that you pose health risks to clients. Painful symptoms make it difficult to work effectively. Progressive diseases might eventually make work impossible, while simultaneously increasing your need for money to address health problems. The cumulative effects of violence, poor nutrition, inadequate shelter, and constant stress create health problems that compound over time and accelerate the aging process. Women in your profession typically look older than their chronological age because their lives are harder than those of women in more protected circumstances. This premature aging reduces your attractiveness to customers and shortens the period during which you can earn money through sex work. Mental health problems, while not recognized or treated in medieval times, are inevitable consequences of the trauma and stress associated with your profession and social circumstances. Constant fear creates anxiety that affects your ability to sleep, eat, and interact normally with other people. Repeated victimization creates depression that makes it difficult to maintain the energy and motivation needed for survival. The dissociation techniques that help you survive intimate encounters with customers also create psychological barriers that make genuine human connection increasingly difficult. Learning to separate your mind from your body during unwanted sexual contact helps you endure the immediate experience, but it also makes it harder to experience physical intimacy as pleasurable or emotionally meaningful in other contexts. The social isolation that results from stigma and marginalization contributes to psychological problems that are compounded by the lack of social support systems that might help address them. Having no one to talk to about your experiences, no one who understands your circumstances, and no one who cares about your welfare creates loneliness that goes beyond simple social isolation to become a form of emotional torture. The economic relationships that govern your profession operate according to market principles that would be familiar to modern economists, but within social and legal frameworks that create unique distortions and inefficiencies. Supply and demand determine pricing, but legal restrictions and social stigma prevent normal market mechanisms from operating effectively. Competition among providers is intense because barriers to entry are low. Any desperate woman can potentially enter the profession, but opportunities for differentiation and market development are limited by legal and social constraints. This creates a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and services that makes it difficult for anyone to earn more than bare subsistence wages. Customer loyalty is difficult to develop and maintain because the illegal nature of the transactions makes ongoing relationships risky for both parties. Customers might prefer to work with providers they know and trust, but they also might avoid repeated contacts to reduce their exposure to legal or social consequences. Quality control and consumer protection are non-existent because neither providers nor customers can appeal to authorities when transactions go wrong. This creates market conditions where fraud, violence, and exploitation are common because there are no effective mechanisms for preventing or addressing them. Price discrimination based on customer characteristics, wealth, social status, perceived dangerousness is common but creates additional risks because it might offend customers who feel they're being overcharged or treated unfairly. Negotiating these price differences requires diplomatic skills and accurate assessment of customer psychology. The informal credit systems that develop between regular customers and providers create additional economic relationships that must be managed carefully. Extending credit to customers who might not be able or willing to repay creates risks, but refusing credit might eliminate customers who could provide steady income over time. Seasonal price variations reflect changes in supply and demand that create opportunities for increased earnings during peak periods, but also increased competition and potential conflicts with other providers. Understanding these market cycles and planning accordingly requires economic sophistication that most medieval women don't have opportunities to develop in other contexts. The broader economic impact of your profession on medieval society represents a significant but largely unacknowledged contribution to social stability and economic activity. Your services provide outlets for sexual desires that might otherwise create social problems through adultery, rape, or other forms of sexual misconduct that could destabilize marriages and communities. The money that flows through your profession supports not just sex workers, but also the broader network of people who provide goods and services to marginalized populations. Tavern keepers, boarding house operators, petty criminals, and various merchants all derive income from the economic activity generated by sex work, even if they wouldn't acknowledge these relationships publicly. The information networks that develop around illegal activities provide intelligence that can be valuable to authorities, merchants, and other groups who need to understand social and economic conditions. Sex workers often have access to information from multiple social levels and might serve as informal sources of intelligence about everything from political plots to economic opportunities. Your profession also serves as a safety valve for social tensions that might otherwise create more serious problems for authorities and communities. Men who can't afford marriage, soldiers far from home, travelers without social connections, and others who might become sources of social disruption can find outlets for their frustrations and desires through commercial sex that keeps them from creating problems for the broader community. The regulation of your profession through informal mechanisms rather than formal laws creates a parallel system of social control that operates according to different principles than mainstream legal and social institutions. This system includes its own forms of justice, dispute resolution, and social organization that serve populations who can't access or trust mainstream institutions. These parallel institutions develop their own customs, hierarchies, and rules that govern relationships between sex workers, customers, competitors, and other stakeholders. Understanding and navigating these informal systems requires social skills and cultural knowledge that are specific to marginalized communities and have limited application in mainstream society. The enforcement mechanisms for these informal systems include reputation management, economic sanctions, social ostracism, and violence that operate independently of official legal systems. A sex worker who violates community norms might find herself excluded from information networks, denied access to safe working locations, or targeted for violence by competitors or community enforcers. The leadership structures within these marginalized communities might include older sex workers who've survived long enough to gain experience and influence, criminal figures who control territory and provide protection, or business owners who serve marginalized populations and have economic interests in maintaining stability and order. The cultural practices that develop within these communities create forms of social solidarity and mutual support that help individuals survive conditions that would be impossible to endure alone. These might include rituals for mourning colleagues who've died, ceremonies for marking significant events or transitions, or traditions for sharing resources and information that help everyone survive. The knowledge systems that develop within these communities include practical information about everything from herbal medicine to customer psychology to legal strategies that help individuals navigate the complex challenges of survival at society's margins. This knowledge is typically transmitted orally and informally, creating educational networks that operate parallel to formal educational institutions. The linguistic practices of marginalized communities might include specialized vocabularies, coded communication systems, and cultural references that serve multiple functions, maintaining group solidarity, facilitating communication in dangerous situations, and creating barriers that exclude outsiders who might pose threats to community members. The artistic and cultural expressions that emerge from these communities reflect the unique experiences and perspectives of people who live outside mainstream society. These might include songs, stories, jokes, and other forms of entertainment that help people cope with difficult circumstances while also preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge. The religious and spiritual practices within these communities might adapt mainstream religious traditions to address the specific needs and circumstances of marginalized people, or might develop alternative spiritual systems that provide meaning and comfort without the judgment and condemnation that often characterize official religious institutions. The aging process for women in your profession creates predictable patterns of declining income, increasing health problems, and growing desperation that must be managed without social safety nets or retirement systems. Understanding these patterns and planning for them requires long-term thinking that's difficult to maintain when daily survival is uncertain. Some women manage to transition out of sex work through marriage, religious conversion, or economic opportunities that provide alternative sources of income, but these transitions are rare and difficult because they require overcoming social stigma, developing new skills, and accessing opportunities that are typically denied to people with histories in illegal professions. More commonly, aging sex workers find themselves competing unsuccessfully with younger women for customers, accepting lower prices for their services, or taking greater risks to maintain their income levels. This downward spiral typically accelerates as health problems increase and appearance deteriorates, creating conditions where survival becomes increasingly difficult. The final stages of life for women in your profession are typically marked by extreme poverty, serious health problems, and social isolation that make death both likely and potentially welcome as an escape from unbearable circumstances. The few women who survive to old age often do so as objects of charity or pity rather than as people with dignity and autonomy. The broader historical significance of your experiences and those of women like you lies not in the profession itself, but in what those experiences reveal about medieval society and human resilience under extreme conditions. Your story illuminates the harsh realities of life for marginalized people in historical periods that are often romanticized in popular culture. Your survival strategies demonstrate forms of intelligence, creativity, and determination that challenge stereotypes about both medieval women and sex workers. The skills required to survive in your circumstances, reading people quickly, managing complex negotiations, navigating dangerous social situations, maintaining psychological stability under extreme stress, represent forms of expertise that deserve recognition even if they were developed in circumstances that society prefers not to acknowledge. Your experiences also reveal the connections between individual desperation and broader social and economic systems that create conditions where some people have few or no legitimate survival options. Understanding these connections helps explain how societies can simultaneously condemn certain behaviors while creating conditions that make those behaviors nearly inevitable for some populations. The documentation of your daily reality provides historical evidence about topics that are typically absent from official records and academic histories. The lived experience of marginalization, the practical challenges of survival in illegal professions, the human cost of social stigma and economic exclusion. These themes are rarely addressed in historical sources that focus on elites and mainstream institutions. So there you have it, in all its grim and unglamorous detail, what medieval prostitutes actually did all day. Not the romanticized version found in popular entertainment, but the grinding reality of survival at society's margins during one of history's most challenging periods. The daily routine of finding customers, negotiating payments, avoiding violence, managing health problems, navigating legal risks, and maintaining some small sense of humanity in circumstances designed to destroy it. These women's lives were not inspiring or empowering or progressive. They were desperate responses to impossible circumstances, survival strategies employed by people who had no better options available to them. Their experiences reveal both the worst aspects of human nature and society, and the remarkable resilience that allows people to endure conditions that should be unendurable. Sweet dreams. And perhaps tonight you'll appreciate not just your material comforts, but the social systems and economic opportunities that make it possible to survive and thrive without resorting to such desperate measures. But there's one final aspect of this grim existence that deserves attention, because it reveals something particularly disturbing about how medieval society managed to simultaneously depend on and despise the women who provided these services. The relationship between your profession and the broader community creates a web of hypocrisy and willful blindness that would be fascinating if it weren't so destructive to the people caught in its center. Consider the peculiar social dynamics that develop around businesses that everyone uses but no one acknowledges. The merchant who publicly condemns vice while privately negotiating rates for your services. The priest who preaches about the dangers of sin while maintaining a regular schedule of visits that have nothing to do with spiritual counseling. The magistrate who sentences women like you to public punishment while keeping a mistress who's only technically different from you because she serves one customer instead of many. This creates a social environment where everyone participates in maintaining the fiction that your profession doesn't really exist, while simultaneously ensuring that it continues to exist because they need what you provide. You become a living contradiction, simultaneously invisible and indispensable, condemned and utilized, despised and necessary. The psychological toll of this collective hypocrisy extends beyond the obvious damage of social stigma to create a peculiar form of gaslighting that makes it difficult to maintain any sense of reality or self-worth. When the same people who use your services publicly condemn your existence, when the society that creates the conditions forcing you into your profession simultaneously punishes you for being forced into it, the cognitive dissonance becomes a form of mental torture that compounds all the other stresses of your existence. Your daily interactions with this hypocrisy require developing a thick skin and a cynical worldview that protects you from the psychological damage of constantly being treated as simultaneously essential and worthless. You learn to recognize the gap between what people say and what they do, between public morality and private behavior, between official condemnation and practical necessity. This knowledge makes you dangerous in ways that go beyond the obvious threats posed by your illegal profession. You know secrets about respectable citizens that could destroy reputations and upset social hierarchies. You understand the gap between public virtue and private vice in ways that could undermine the moral authority of religious and civil leaders. You possess information about human nature and social hypocrisy that challenges the foundations of medieval society's self-understanding. The fact that you possess this dangerous knowledge while being simultaneously powerless to use it safely creates another layer of frustration and psychological stress. You know which prominent citizens are hypocrites, which religious figures are frauds, which authorities are corrupt, but you can't expose these truths without destroying yourself in the process. This powerless knowledge becomes another form of burden that you must carry alongside all the other stresses of your existence. The awareness that the people who judge and condemn you are often worse than you are, combined with the inability to defend yourself by revealing their hypocrisy, creates a sense of injustice that eats away at whatever remnants of hope or dignity you might still possess. The seasonal cycles of moral fervor that periodically sweep through medieval communities create predictable patterns of persecution that you must navigate carefully. These campaigns typically coincide with religious observances, political pressures, or economic problems that create social tensions requiring scapegoats. Understanding these cycles and preparing for them becomes another survival skill that most people never need to develop. During periods of moral campaigning, the same customers who normally seek your services might become your most vocal critics in public forums. The same officials who normally tolerate your presence might suddenly enforce laws they've previously ignored, and the same community members who normally coexist peacefully with your profession might suddenly demand your removal or punishment. These shifts in community attitude are often temporary and politically motivated rather than based on genuine moral conviction, but they create real dangers that must be taken seriously. Being caught during a moral campaign might result in punishments that are far more severe than those imposed during normal times, because the authorities need to demonstrate their commitment to public virtue through visible and harsh enforcement. The unpredictable nature of these campaigns makes long-term planning nearly impossible, and creates constant underlying anxiety about when the next wave of persecution might begin. You must constantly monitor community sentiment, political developments, and religious calendar events that might trigger moral fervor, while simultaneously trying to maintain your income and manage all the other challenges of daily survival. The impact of major historical events on your daily existence creates additional layers of uncertainty and danger that affect every aspect of your life. Wars might bring armies that represent increased business opportunities, but also increased risks of violence and disease. Plagues create public health concerns that might lead to scapegoating of marginalized populations. Economic crises affect everyone's circumstances, but hit marginalized people hardest because they have the fewest resources and the least social protection. Political upheavals can completely change the legal and social landscape in ways that make previously tolerated activities suddenly dangerous, or previously forbidden activities suddenly acceptable. A new ruler might implement moral reforms that crack down on vice, or might adopt more pragmatic policies that increase tolerance for activities that serve social stability. Religious developments can similarly transform your circumstances overnight. A new religious movement might inspire moral fervor that targets your profession specifically, or might emphasize forgiveness and redemption in ways that reduce persecution of marginalized people. The arrival of a new religious leader, the establishment of a new religious institution, or the adoption of new religious practices can all have profound impacts on how your profession is viewed and treated. Understanding these broader historical forces and their potential impacts on your circumstances requires a level of political and social awareness that most medieval women don't have opportunities to develop. But survival in your profession demands this awareness, because changes in the broader society can quickly transform your working conditions from merely difficult to actively lethal. The inheritance patterns and family structures of medieval society create additional complications for women in your profession, because they operate according to principles of legitimate lineage and property transfer that exclude people like you by definition. You can't inherit property or titles, can't legitimately pass on wealth or status to children, and can't participate in the kinship networks that provide social and economic security for most people. This exclusion from normal family and inheritance structures means that you have no safety net beyond what you can create through your own efforts and relationships. There's no family property to fall back on during hard times, no relatives with social standing who might provide protection or assistance, no legitimate children who might care for you in old age. The absence of these normal social connections forces you to create alternative support networks among other marginalized people, but these relationships are necessarily more fragile and less reliable than family connections because they're based on mutual desperation rather than blood ties and legal obligations. The legal status of women in medieval society creates additional barriers that affect every aspect of your existence. Women generally have limited legal rights and require male guardianship for many activities. But women in your profession typically lack access to legitimate male guardians who might provide legal protection and representation. This legal vulnerability means that you have virtually no recourse when you're cheated, assaulted, or otherwise wronged, because the legal system assumes that women need male representatives to navigate it effectively. The very circumstances that force you into your profession also eliminate your access to the legal protections that might help you escape or improve those circumstances. The religious framework that governs medieval society creates particularly complex challenges for women in your profession because it simultaneously condemns your activities and offers the possibility of redemption through repentance and reform. This creates psychological tensions between the practical necessities of survival and the spiritual implications of your choices. Some women in your profession maintain strong religious beliefs despite engaging in activities their religion condemns, viewing their circumstances as temporary trials that can be endured and eventually overcome through faith and perseverance. Others abandon religious belief entirely, reasoning that a loving God wouldn't allow such suffering, or that religious institutions are too hypocritical to deserve respect or loyalty. Most develop some form of compartmentalization that allows them to maintain spiritual beliefs while engaging in condemned activities, often through bargaining with God, seeking special intercession from particular saints, or believing that their suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next. These psychological strategies provide some comfort and meaning, but also create additional internal conflicts that must be managed alongside all the other stresses of survival. The medical understanding of medieval society creates particular dangers for women in your profession because sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy complications, and other health problems associated with sex work are poorly understood and often attributed to moral rather than medical causes. This means that seeking medical help often involves admitting to sinful behavior that might result in moral condemnation rather than effective treatment. The limited effectiveness of medieval medicine means that many health problems that could be easily treated with modern medical knowledge become serious or fatal conditions. A simple bacterial infection might kill you because antibiotics won't be invented for another 600 years. A difficult pregnancy might end in death because cesarean sections are rarely attempted and usually fatal when they are. The connection between your profession and health problems also creates additional social stigma because diseases associated with sex work are viewed as divine punishment for sinful behavior, rather than natural consequences of risky activities. This moral interpretation of illness makes it even more difficult to obtain medical care and social support when health problems arise. The economic systems of medieval society create boom and bust cycles that affect everyone but hit marginalized people particularly hard because they have the least economic security and the fewest alternatives when their primary income sources disappear. Good economic times might increase demand for your services and allow you to charge higher prices, but they also attract more competition and might lead to increased law enforcement as communities try to maintain their improved reputations. Bad economic times reduce demand for your services because people have less discretionary income, but they also reduce competition as some women find alternative survival strategies or simply die from poverty-related causes. The net effect on your circumstances depends on complex interactions between supply and demand that are difficult to predict or control. The technological limitations of medieval society affect every aspect of your daily existence in ways that modern people would find difficult to imagine. The absence of effective lighting means that most activities must be conducted during daylight hours or by the flickering light of candles or oil lamps that are expensive and dangerous. The lack of efficient heating systems means that winter work is not just uncomfortable but potentially life-threatening. The primitive transportation systems mean that travel is slow, expensive and dangerous, limiting your ability to move to new locations when local conditions become unfavorable. The inadequate communication systems mean that information travels slowly and unreliably, making it difficult to learn about opportunities or dangers in other locations. The absence of effective preservation and storage technologies means that food spoils quickly and must be consumed soon after it's obtained, making it difficult to build up reserves for times when income is interrupted. The lack of secure storage systems means that any possessions you accumulate must be hidden or carried with you, limiting what you can own and creating constant anxiety about theft. And so your days continue, one after another, in this grinding cycle of survival that tests human endurance in ways that comfortable people can't imagine. Each morning brings the same uncertainties. Each evening brings the same fears. Each season brings the same challenges in slightly different forms. The remarkable thing isn't that most women in your circumstances die young and miserable. That's exactly what anyone would expect given the conditions. The remarkable thing is that some survive at all, that human beings can endure such systematic dehumanization and somehow maintain enough spirit to continue fighting for life in circumstances that seem designed to crush that spirit entirely. Your existence serves as a testament to human resilience. even if it's resilience that most people would prefer not to acknowledge or think about. The skills you develop, the knowledge you acquire, the strength you demonstrate, these represent forms of human accomplishment that deserve recognition, even if they were developed in circumstances that society prefers to ignore. But perhaps most importantly, your story serves as a window into the realities of historical periods that are often sanitized and romanticized in popular culture. The medieval world wasn't a time of chivalry and romance for most people who lived in it. It was a brutal survival environment where the strong preyed upon the weak, where economic security was rare, where social safety nets didn't exist, and where most people lived short, hard lives dominated by fear, scarcity, and suffering. Understanding your reality helps us understand the true nature of historical societies and the real costs of the social and economic systems that created conditions where some people had few or no legitimate survival options. Your suffering wasn't inevitable or natural. It was the predictable result of human choices about how to organize society and distribute resources and opportunities. And with that sobering thought, we'll let you drift off to sleep, hopefully with a deeper appreciation for the social progress that makes it possible for people in modern societies to survive and thrive without resorting to such desperate measures. Sweet dreams, and spare a thought for those forgotten women who did what they had to do to survive in a world that was often crueler than we like to remember.